Hello, thank you for taking a seat at the table with us tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about um
Something
guys, it's a
I
lot
would
later
do.
for me, okay? I've been up, I had no nap today or anything, and
Uh,
barely any carbs, so
I
my
had no nap
and
today or
barely any
cabs.
cubs. No cabs.
Hello and welcome to Table for Five with No Reservations. Take a seat at the table for a fresh, sweet, salty, tart, and pleasantly bitter conversation.
hello, thank you for taking a seat at the table. Tonight we're going to be talking about how autism is more than one thing. We see how it relates in different TV shows and different movies, and a lot of us in our home life here do not necessarily relate to autism that way. A lot of people outside of our world don't really always understand that. So they see one autism in one way, whether it's a person or a TV show or a movie, they sometimes think that all people with autism or that autistic are that way. So we're going to start off by talking about what it looks like in our homes, and then maybe kind of talk about the differences that we see represented in the media. So tonight we have Jamie,
Hello.
Tabitha,
Hello.
Rachel,
Hey, everybody.
Jen,
Hello.
and me. I'm Kim McIsaac. Jamie, do you want to let everyone know how it looks like for you guys?
Yeah, to be honest, I was that person, and that's why I wasn't sure my son was autistic because I went off a lot of stereotypes I had seen in the media. And even with that, it wasn't really much. And I will say I did know a couple autistic people throughout my life. And so, kind of just judging off of them, I thought that's what autism is. So, for my son, he doesn't make eye contact with many people. He is, I want to say antisocial, but he keeps to himself a lot or does his own thing, which I think is often what people think of autism. So he does do those things. My son does speak, although I didn't know people were non-speaking. I mean, I knew people were non-speaking, but I didn't know that was part of autism really before I came into the world of autism. But he does speak now. He was pretty much non-speaking until about 4. He could say a couple things, but not communicative at all. He was just a really fussy baby, which I thought of autism too, because someone I knew had a baby. Their baby was always colicky, and someone had told me at one point that that's a sign of autism. I don't think it necessarily is a sign, but I think it's associated a lot. But he's also a really happy, silly boy. He's super cuddly, and I didn't think that my child would be cuddly if they had autism. So yeah, I think my ideas of what autism were really set me behind, because since he wasn't all the things I thought autism was, I didn't think he had autism. And then when I found out more and like what a spectrum it is, and that a lot of the things he does, like he doesn't flap his hands, but he runs back and forth and he spins. And so he's doing similar things, but just in a different way than you would hear about. He doesn't tiptoe walk. I knew that was a big sign, and that we never had that. So yeah.
What about you, Jen?
A lot like Jamie. I didn't know anyone that was on the spectrum. Don't think I had actually ever met an individual that had autism. But when the word was kind of creeping around, it's you think of Rain Man. And Kaya was nonverbal, non-speaking until she was about 5. She was a girl, so she presented differently than a boy, or the typical signs of autism. She didn't have a lot of interaction. She didn't have a lot of eye contact, but she was, and I would justify it, like Jamie said, she was super cuddly as she got older, not when she was a baby, but as she got older. So I don't know, just all of those things. I had friends that 3 of us, we had babies all within months of each other. Obviously, when they're babies, there was no differences, but as they became toddlers, it was apparent that Kaya was different. But I've always said when she was younger, she needed nothing from me. So I knew that was different from my friends' children. I don't know. She was fascinated by the TV. No one else's kids cared. So there was these stark differences as she got older. And by older, I mean 2. Yeah. Definitely different than the other children.
What about you, Rachel?
Celie is autistic, and we have, at the same time as that diagnosis came to us, she was diagnosed with ADHD. And I remember not really having fear about it, not really understanding what we were necessarily talking about, certainly not to the level that I do now, but I just didn't know. And so when she was diagnosed with autism, and ADHD together, I was able to like really identify with so many of the things that I would read, not necessarily about autism, but about specifically girls with autism, because it can be so different. Celie, when she got her words back, even when she didn't have words, she was social. She would approach people. She was interested and engaging when she was connected. She always has had that sort of tune out, check out, disconnect thing to her. But when she's in, she will let you into her world. So when I found out stuff about autism, I just remember feeling so comforted. And then it became clear that even though I could find that on a Pinterest search by way of some graphic someplace, there weren't many people telling the story of that girl. There was not a ton of girls to look to. And, Celie's skill scatter made it so that she had a lot of like points and parts of her that were very similar to a ton of boys that I've heard stories of or about or known the moms of. And, it wasn't really until finding you guys that I felt like so connected with so many moms, whether it was like about our sleep issues or elopement or aggression or safety stuff. And so I sort of started to build my autism community. And then we became a little bit less like some anomaly feeling. But then the plot thickens because as I began to dive deeper with these moms that our children had things in common, there became this like understanding that, oh, that's one of those parts that's different about Celie than most autistic kids. She has fetal alcohol syndrome as well, which is, as we've learned on other episodes, brain damage. And then adding Celie's mental health onto it really kind of changes the diagnosis. And though anxiety and depression can be common, we sort of grew out of that common ground too when she advanced sort of to bipolar, or diagnosis changed to bipolar. Anyhow, I feel very much like we have a face in representation among our community in parts and pieces, but there's no constellation like my Celie Flanagan. So it's not necessarily about searching out the right representation. It's about like coming together for us and saying like this community is working together and these are people that have differences too. And for that reason, I think we've grown a lot. But no, I've never seen a Celie Flanagan represented in the
Well,
media.
I think though you have the unique thing where a lot of people don't understand, because Celie is social and she's verbal and she has this big personality, that they assume that she's so-called what they would call high functioning, and they don't really see her struggles. I mean, you've talked about
She
this a
sounds
lot.
very capable when she's talking about these big obscure things, which she could talk about como proteins for a long time. Those are the ones that rush to the scene of a boo-boo and they congeal and they make a scab. I mean, como proteins, right? Like this kid has got to have some stuff dialed in. Now she cannot figure out how to pull up her pants after she's gone potty. So it's complicated. And even I've talked openly with you guys each about how I write on Flanaville. There's a lot of like makeup tutorials where Celie Flanagan is doing makeup like RuPaul or playing a game or running amok. And it's sort of like Blair Witch. Yeah, like she looks like a little Mimi. Looks like Blair Witch camcorders. But listen, I realize that perpetuates the fact that then I'm writing this stark contrast of holy Christmas, I had to cut off my hair because it's been pulled. But there are many facets to her. So in sharing our story, I really try and bring that whole kaleidoscope to light, because I know that there's somebody looking for a story that's just the same as ours in that lane, in that facet, in that day. It's hard to share it all.
Now, Tabitha, you have the unique thing from the five of us of having two individuals in your home, so you see differences with your own children, never mind with other children and people that you see and talk about. And I'm sure that there's assumptions made even with them because they're siblings.
Yeah. We get so when Nixon was diagnosed, we got a lot from a lot of people. Well, but he's high functioning. We got that all the time because Nixon did not have classic signs of autism. He had a language delay. He was social, always has been social. He's a social guy with his peers, likes being around people, is snuggly, is giggly, is smiley. He does struggle with eye contact, but he likes to be engaged with people. So we dealt with that a lot from people, and I'm like, I don't know what you mean by that. Like, what do you mean when you say that? Is that like meaning that don't worry because he's high functioning, you know? And by his diagnosis, they took away Asperger's, but he's not in that category per his diagnosis of what Asperger's used to be. So no, he's not in the category of what people would call high functioning, even though we don't use those terms. He has struggles. He has learning struggles, just like things that people don't understand. And I felt like it was almost like making an excuse for his autism. Like, don't worry, it's okay because he's high functioning.
Like it's supposed to make you feel better about it.
Yeah. Yes, that was exactly what it was. Yes. And
but it also diminishes the struggle a little bit.
Oh,
yeah,
diminishes the whole.
Yeah. And we get that now too. Like if we're out in public and we have to say it to strangers, they'll come back with, oh, I would have never guessed, or whatever the case may be. Because now that he's getting bigger, if we have issues in public, then people think he's, like a bad kid or is not listening or whatever the case may be. And so we are finding we have to say it more often than we did in the past. But I didn't know anything about autism. I only knew what was kind of depicted in the media. I did work with kids who had diagnoses and things like that, but nothing like personal to me or to my family. And so I didn't have the like intimate look at autism before Nixon was diagnosed. And really it's like you get Rain Man depictions, or you get atypical depictions, or you get parenthood depictions. And I always feel like my kids don't fit into that media box, really, their personalities. And then with Nora, like she has more visual signs, I would say, to cue people in that she has autism. She has hand flapping. She has way less eye contact than Nixon does, which his isn't great. She has a tendency to be in her own space. She gets fixated on what she's interested in, and it's hard to redirect her at her age. So I think like we got less of that with her, which is pretty surprising. Nixon always made sounds to engage, and she's nonverbal and uses a device. And, It's like a little bit more of a visual cue into society or others that she may be autistic. And she's constantly putting her hands over her ears, which is a huge sign in public. So it was strange. It was definitely strange. And it really kind of hit me hard when he was diagnosed that we kept, I can't even tell you how many times people would say that. And we did not get that with our daughter, which is interesting because most people don't consider the way girls present on the spectrum as signs of autism. I think there's so much more pages, so much more people writing about it, so much more videos. Like social media depicts all of our kids. We all depict our kids. So people can see kind of a different view of what each one of our kids looks like. But I do feel like the general population does not understand. You can have massive struggles and also be highly intelligent. You can have, know every planet or space or every dinosaur in our house, but also not be able to say the ABCs. Yeah. Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's not what they show to the general population.
Yeah.
Lots of differences in our house.
Obviously, with us, it was so long ago that it wasn't in the media, it wasn't in the TV shows or the movies. The only reference we had, which is a reference I always got, I just want to spit every time somebody mentions Rain Man because it just irritates me now because I've so many like Rain Man, like no, not like Rain Man, not like Rain Man, not at all. Like, actually, I've never seen Rain Man, but I know enough to know that she's nothing like
not that. Yeah.
My husband's seen it. I haven't.
Movie night in Minnesota, ladies? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. And the only other, like, I saw a movie, like, this was just like a little vague memory that I had. I watched a movie that had a girl with autism, or saw something on TV, and it just showed her rocking in the corner and nobody could touch her. She was like literally in her own world. So those are the only two like visions that I had of autism, and it wasn't even a thing that crossed my mind. Of course, we didn't have all the knowledge. We didn't have, now the doctors do a checklist at 18 months, a screening. Nothing like that was done. Even the doctor wasn't that knowledgeable about autism then. And her signs were
They
like,
still aren't, just so you know. They've not come much very far.
Can I get an
I
amen?
feel like I do know a lot more than I did back then, but it's like you all said, it's like every kid presents differently. It all depends what you're bringing to the doctor too, because if there might be something that you're not concerned about or you're not thinking about at that doctor's appointment. So it's like if you don't bring certain things to the doctor's attention or they don't ask you certain questions, especially when you're a first time mom, especially when you haven't really been around it a lot. And like we said, it's the extreme versions are like, nobody's thinking a savant. That's not usually coming out when they're 2 years old anyways, except like in extreme situations. I think that also happens sometimes too. She did lots of things that I didn't think to bring up to the doctor. Like
I
she used
even
to,
feel like sometimes you bring stuff up, Kimmy, like you've said, and you just get shot down. You'll say, "Oh, she sleeps okay. She's up every night." And it's really getting kind of hard. And then they'll be like, either melatonin or what does she eat? Like, have you tried the goddamn root vegetables?
I also feel like
Don't
there's
work.
just
They don't
certain
work.
things that are strongly associated with autism that when those things don't happen to your children, then they're not fit into that box. So it's like, oh, your kid sleeps, they probably don't have autism. Or like, they're not a picky eater. No, not very likely. So when you have children that present in different ways, sometimes it definitely goes under the radar. Like when she was diagnosed, it was a very different time. The knowledge was, I'm thrilled for I don't care what it represents. For me, any representation of autism on a TV show or a movie, like, is exciting to me because 10, 12 years of her life, there was nothing, no TV shows that showed it. There was no movies. And I understand it's not necessarily representing her type of autism, but like, I'm just happy for it to get put out there for people to see because for a long time, nobody even knew what it was. When I say they didn't know what it was, like they literally never heard of it, So if she was having a tantrum in a store and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, she has autism. They didn't know what I was talking about. Now, granted, now people might not know the whole gist of it,
Mhm.
but they have an idea. They've heard of it. They have a general kind of knowledge, or maybe know somebody in their family or a neighbor or their sister's brother's cousin's, niece or whatever it might be. This was the time when people they hadn't heard of it. Like it wasn't something you worried about because it wasn't really on anybody's radar. The only reason that I think she even got the evaluation was because when I had a person come out for early intervention, it was just this one person. She had written question of autism, which I was outraged. I thought it was ridiculous. Her doctor was like, yeah, I don't see that. All the specialists that worked with her were like, same thing. She's too social. She's lovable. Like she just doesn't have all these typical things. But then again, in girls, they don't always show the same. And although she has more classic autism, I think a lot of times when girls are more severe, you do see the more typical signs than more moderate girls. They definitely have the masking and trying to fit in and kind of trying to like adapt to their environment where it's a little bit harder when you have somebody who's more severe. They're not going to tend to do that as much. So looking back at what we know now, there was lots of signs. We were concerned that her language wasn't developing. We were concerned that sometimes her receptive language was inconsistent, where it seemed like she understood sometimes and other times she didn't. Like we were concerned with those, but we didn't necessarily think it was autism. We kind of thought it was like some kind of speech or language delay.
It's hard to see that in a little kid. Like you're not, you're thinking, oh, just because they're not speaking now, even if it's like 5, like, oh, you don't assume they're never going to speak. You just don't imagine the future like that with your child. I don't think anyone really does. Like, you're not like, oh, what's my 3-year-old going to be like when they're 20? You don't do that.
That's what makes it difficult too when people say like high functioning. How do you know a 3-year-old's high functioning? Like I feel like that's just like you're not going to know until they're
Not all Doogie Howser.
yeah.
It's
And
also like there's so much to the world that we live in that's sort of objective to the criteria that you're being measured against. For instance, my daughter is from the Mayo Clinic called high functioning autism to equate for her IQ, severe fetal alcohol syndrome because of all this lights out stuff and misfiring, bipolar to like a pediatric diagnosis is to be severe, anxiety, which lays the tracks for the whole thing, ADHD that sets the pace for the whole thing. So if you talk to Mayo Clinic, this is what the case is. If you talk to an autism clinic, she has severe autism. If you talk to the mental health caseworker, she has behavioral blah, blah, blahs. Like it's all in line and objective to what the goddamn criteria is for the situation. And it's still just a fragment in time.
well, and it's also very subjective. is what it really
Maybe I don't
comes
mean
down to.
objective, Kimmy. I understand what you're saying.
Because it's all these tests are just run by people, and yes, they have their scoring systems and their checklists, but all subjective to how this person feels and what they're seeing at that time, like what you're saying, Rachel.
Mhm.
And there's no definitive test that you can have for any of these things. So it's
When we talked to the Down syndrome moms and they said there was a blood test, all 5 of us were like, "You mean you get a yes or a no?
Yeah.
Thank you."
I was going to say I was different. No one come at me. I was the parent in denial. I knew my daughter was different. You know what? I want to be I have a different child now. She is night and day from the child she was. I can't even explain the difference in her from even 2 short years ago, let alone when she was a baby. So like Jamie said, you just have no idea,
Yeah.
but I knew something was different. Autism started floating around. I actually talked the secretary that books the autism diagnoses out of booking her appointment because I said, well, she takes my hand. I know exactly what she needs. She communicates with me fine, and I might have fibbed about a mama and a dada and a little babble here and there. We had none, by the way. And I would ask anyone that would come over, my friends, do you think she's autistic? Like my friends know if my kid has autism or not. Like literally. And I remember my friends.
You brought that egg salad.
Yeah, I remember my friend saying, "Oh no, she doesn't have autism." And again, she had never known anyone with autism, but it was that perception of what autism was. So there's no way my little girl watching TV could be autistic.
Yeah.
And I held on to that as long as I could.
Yeah. I will say that one thing I have noticed between my son and my daughter is when we're talking to providers in general, this is across the board. I am not kidding you. The way they speak about my children's autism is completely different. So with Nixon, they have no problem talking about his specific struggles directly in front of him, framing it as a struggle, talking about it as if everything is like not negative, but reality. This is what it is. This is his struggle. When it comes to my daughter, they have a tendency to elevate her skills. Like if they're saying something that she's struggling with, they immediately respond with something that she's like good at or that is an advanced skill. It's really mind blowing. So as how all these people talk about harder to get girls diagnosed. And I can see why that's the case. Like my daughter's autism presents in more of a classic way than my son does, but people accept his autism more than they do my daughter's, which is fascinating to me. So they will, even on her school evaluation, the way that they wrote it up is completely different than the way that they wrote Nixon's school evaluation.
Crazy.
It's fascinating. Yeah, fascinating. I don't know if that's a sex thing or if it's like we're used to like talking about girls in a delicate manner and boys are more like this gruff, like, oh, they're a boy, rough and tumble.
They don't always talk about girls in a delicate manner in that their paperwork. I can tell you that from the other
No,
side.
I'm saying in the terms that they use, like the language that they use is more delicate and prissy than like with the way prissy than the way they talk about boys. It's like the way our society views like masculinity and femininity. It's fascinating.
I always thought they put a lot of pride in Seeley's ability to emote, even though I could see it like a little bit differently. Like, hey, she's on a roller coaster, so I'm glad you think this is real cute that she can cry and laugh in the same blink. Or like, I think that when you're someone like Seeley is that can be so connected, so engaged, so disconnected, so disengaged, that I always associated their pride to like, oh, it was a good day. She was able to blah, 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 blah.
I mean, I think that's part of their training is to do that.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to throw out all negatives. They try to like, especially when it's like school evaluations and stuff like that. They're trying to accent the positive.
Like IEPs, they're supposed to say they have to list the positives first or the progress first. Like, and I think just in general, I'm sure that's like a practice they do, which like sometimes I'm all for, other times I'm like, just get to it.
A sandwich, so it's
like compliment sandwich. Compliment sandwich.
Yeah, we did that in film school.
In bad management, that's called a hug and a spank.
That's the thing with autism. Even like these professionals, they don't know how it's going to manifest in your child. So they could diagnose your child at a young age. And you'll hear different stories all the time where like they told someone like, oh, your child's going to be so severe, they're never going to talk. that child talks. They're doing a lot of things they told they weren't going to be able to do. Some people are told, oh, your child will be like high functioning or whatever they call it, whatever at the time. And then that child is more severe. Like, I don't think they can directly tell.
No,
And
your
so, and
kid's
that's what's the
potential.
uniqueness of autism, is that like we don't know. I don't know what Jesse's gonna be like. I always get this thing like a few years back, and I know it just happened again. There was some guy on like The Voice or American Idol, and he auditioned, I think, and he sang great, and he had autism, and I always support. I'm so excited for that to be portrayed in media, that like people on the spectrum can do so much. But I think like 10 people sent me that video, and they're like, Jesse could do this one day. And I'm like, this doesn't mean Jesse can sing. That's like saying like, you know, like I'm part Filipino, part
So
German.
you
Like,
can cook and dance.
yeah, like a part Filipino, part German sings. And then they're like, Jamie, you can sing one day because she can. It's like, no, like we all are different people. And that's the thing with our kids.
You do have
So
good hair
much.
because of that genetic pool, though. Like, that's a statistic truth.
Maybe that's what Kitty G has. I don't know.
I think that too, when people talk about the spectrum, I think that there's just a lot of misunderstanding about that, because I think people think it goes from like 1 to 100, you know, and you're
Yeah.
kind of like either on the low end or you're on the high end or you fall in the middle. And that's like not really what the spectrum means. It's just, it's not linear. It's not, you know, that's not how it goes. When I first started hearing, because she wasn't diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, because they didn't have that when she was diagnosed. Eventually they transferred it over to that. And that's what I even thought. I mean, you know, but it doesn't mean that. It just means that there's communication, there's social, there's all these different deficits that a person could have that has autism, but you could be severe, but not necessarily have behaviors. You could be high functioning and have extreme aggression. So it doesn't mean like you have all these things if you're severe, and then you don't have any of these things if you're high functioning. And especially, I think the verbal component is very confusing to people. I mean, I don't think we all fully understand it either, where if somebody is verbal, it's assumed that they're high functioning, but that's not necessarily the case. There are people that are nonverbal that don't have issues with cognitive, you know, that don't have intellectual disability, but is assumed if you're nonverbal that you do. You know, it's just a lot of different variations with each individual. I personally think severe, they have like their own spectrum, like in itself, because it varies so much. Because if someone hears severe, they just automatically picture one thing, or they'll say, oh, they're not severe, they don't do this, or, you know, but that's not necessarily what it means. It just really is the amount of supports that they need is really what it kind of comes down to.
I was gonna say, on the other end, I totally understand why they complain, because I think they get a lot of time that assumption that they're like the good doctor, or they're like a genius, and they're like, no, I still struggle. And
one of my favorite things I've ever read was about high functioning was I'm high functioning until I'm not.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah,
well, it's like I'm functioning.
I mean, and that's why they hate functioning labels, is because like when you put in high functioning, that automatically makes people assume that you have some kind of special talent, or you're completely fine in society. You don't have issues, you don't have struggles, and it diminishes a piece of who they are, basically.
A lot of that stuff is savant syndrome, which is very rare.
Yeah.
It does happen. It does happen. There are people that have autism that are just have these genius IQs, that have these talents that are just amazing, but it's a small percentage. For some reason, people think it's like 99.
90. Well, that's the perception. When Kaya was diagnosed in 2012, the medical dictionary, and I have to assume in Canada it's the same as the US as far as terms, maybe not, but that's when they were changing from into ASD, like autism spectrum disorder. And again, don't come at me, people, but I was that parent that in the beginning I was like, oh, she's high functioning, because to me it was like, and now it annoys me, you know, I feel very different about it now, right? But then I was like, well, then it's not as much autism, it's not, you know, and now it's like that she has autism. She has autism, or she's autistic. The label doesn't matter, you know, either way.
For us, one of the things that goes so misunderstood when people are getting to know our family or judging quickly from the outside, or whatever it is, verbal does not mean the same as being able to express yourself. And so
yes,
that is really something. When you encounter my kid and she can volley the conversation back and forth a couple, 3 times. Hi, my name is Celie. What is your name? Ah, la, 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 la. Like it goes together. Or she's using somebody else's language altogether. You don't necessarily know that that's a kid that can't tell you that she hasn't pooped in 6 days. And then it's getting wicked uncomfortable. Or that she is struggling with a certain thing or somebody's making her feel a certain way. So we do lots of stuff to sort of, I know Jamie's spoken on this, but like we will connect through Daniel Tiger or PBS or, some sort of more controlled than YouTube standard of something to like give her expression about it. If I was wondering if she had a toothache, I can't ask her because then it's my language put into her script.
Mhm.
But I can leave the iPad out of her reach, blaring at Autism 100 about the Daniel Tiger Tooth episode and see if she picks up any language around it and gives it back to me,
Yeah. Your terms changed in the American Psychiatric Association changed it in 2013. So
Yeah, it was the level 1 requiring support, level 2 requiring substantial support, and level 3 requiring very substantial support.
It's still
and when
all
Kaya
over
was
my
diagnosed in
paperwork, though.
2012, they didn't have levels, and I just Googled it because it's new. And in 2019, Canada recategorized it for level 1, 2, and 3.
But the
course.
But
changes
is,
now
are the
is
levels through the DSM?
Yeah.
Or are they through, because
DSM-5.
she just got evaluated and she didn't get a level. Like literally just got
Certain
diagnosed.
states do it, some don't.
Mhm.
So the diagnostic criteria, what they would probably list is the level of support instead of the tagging it as level as 1, level 2, level 3. Because Nixon technically is level 2, but they didn't put that in his diagnostic criteria. They put the level of support that was needed, like moderate level of support or whatever. I was just going to say they're trying to add that severity level. So that's the changes to like additional criteria to meet for like substantial support where you have to
Mhm.
hit these other brackets or whatever.
Yeah, they're
It-
trying to like tighten it up a little now, I think. That's what I just read anyways.
It's so confusing.
Well, and that's like how the ADOS and stuff is made. They do the test to like add things up. So I think what are the functions that come out of that? It's like social,
Yeah.
motor,
Repetitive
and yeah,
Communication,
so they,
language
like,
and communication.
communication. Yeah.
yeah, communication. So they like add all those numbers up to give you, but it's just hard because our kids morph and change. Like Jesse couldn't really talk at that time. Now we were told he was severe. Our diagnosis doesn't say that. We were told level 3 severe, but the official diagnosis just says autism spectrum disorder with a language impairment and intellectual disability. So it's just like all over the place. You don't know. And then people change. And obviously, hopefully in his life, he'll live a very long life and he'll only be young for a small portion of his life. But when he gets to be like Alyssa's age, we'll know more about who he's going to be for the rest of his life. So I do appreciate that stuff being portrayed in media, like Atypical. I cry all the time watching that
I
show.
love that show. Yeah.
There's moments like I could see that happening to Jesse when he's older. I don't know for sure if things like that will be like that way for him, but I could definitely see some things. But I also see like that kid's like uber smart about Antarctica. I don't know if Jesse's ever going to be really smart about Antarctica, but maybe, or something like that even. So I appreciate
At least he'll
being
be
able
able
to have
to
like a
sing.
peek of what my kid could be like, because it's hard because that's not portrayed anywhere. But I also hate when someone comes up to me and they're like, oh, Jesse's going to be just like that. I'm like, you don't know that.
Yeah.
Hate
know
it
that.
all.
The one show that I thought did a great portrayal of the different types of autism is Love on the Spectrum, which is more of a reality show. And they showed like what people token as severe. They showed like moderate, more what people would call high functioning, all together in one package on one show. I was like, this is amazing. And they're all trying to find love.
I can't bring
I think
myself to watch those
moderate
shows.
is the
I
most
just can't.
confusing one because
Yeah.
like what
The
does
what?
that mean? I understand severe and I understand level 1 or whatever it might be called now.
In 2 years. Yeah, when they change it
But
again.
it's like those people in the middle, I feel like they're the ones that really get kind of just like completely like
Yeah.
oh, moderate,
hard.
we don't know.
And I feel like I have a kid in the middle but I will tell you right now to our listeners, anyone listening, I literally do not have the same child that I had when she was a toddler and a
School ager.
Older
school ager.
child?
She is a different child now.
I think the other words, those words come into play and they don't
Mhm.
describe the amount of work that went into it. So,
Mm.
like, let's just say Celie stops eloping every day. That'd be that'd be so good. When that behavior has stopped, it will be because of a great deal of work has gone into that.
Mhm.
So it sort of ticks me off that, like, here we worked so hard to give her these scripts that say, "My name is Celie. What is your name?" Blah, 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 like all these things. And they are the things that deter her from getting help or from being understood so fully. Like, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's the progress is, it's so frustrating to me that these words don't talk about the progress. And
I would just
I'm part of the fetal alcohol syndrome community too, and it's interesting to watch that spectrum separate and silo out. They are creating it from fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. They are, you know, there's all these different diagnoses under there, and three of them come with a whole bunch of services and two of them don't. And they're all under the same umbrella. So it's like, it's so interesting to me to see one exploding the idea of all the differences while one is siloing out and
Well, and I feel like
what that's going to bring to anybody.
you really only, like, I personally, as I was accepting these diagnoses for both of my children, I really only, like, thought about the label and category during that time when I was still, like, in this moment after diagnosis or months after diagnosis or year after diagnosis. But when you're trying to, like, process the actual label period, like, this is autism, and trying to move through those feelings. That's the only time I've really thought about where my kids land on the spectrum, because they're my
Mhm.
kids. Their personalities are different, period. Doesn't matter where they land on the spectrum, what they like, dislike, who they are as people. All of that comes into play outside of this category that people throw them into for whatever system we're in that minute.
kind of the whole point, I think, of what we're all trying to say is like, our kids aren't that one thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wish there was one thing. I wish there was just a word I could just describe my kid as so people be accepting of him. But instead, I have to like draw attention to the fact that people need to put in the effort to get to know what autism means, what our kids as individuals are like, and how that manifests in them. But also, we need to keep that label because like that's how we get supports and that's how we get help with things. So it's like this
And then
constant
you'll
battle.
lose
It's like when I'm
and you'll
talking to
lose
the
services.
yeah,
You
when
know,
I'm talking
you'll
to the
like
caseworker, I need those labels and I need to explain to her so that it's a medical way. But I don't need the whole world to like think my kid's high functioning, severe, low functioning. I need them to know that he's him. All our kids are like spectrums of their own, has Rachel's favorite word, they're constellations of their own. And so like get to know people with autism. Don't just assume one thing about them.
it's also important because like you have someone like my daughter who she doesn't necessarily present like she's calm, her body's calm a lot, she's pleasant, she's happy, so she doesn't scream I have severe autism, like if you just look at her and you don't really know.
Unless you're
And
the
by
cab guy or the rental car guy in Florida.
yeah, and by the thing is like it could be detrimental to her safety, like it could
Yeah.
be detrimental to her life if people do not understand what her struggles are and what her needs are.
Even
And
Kimmy, that gets me pissed just all over again about your bus situation that you keep having in this life, where
Mhm.
your daughter has this predisposition. Mine is wired right now at 7 to be like F off or no thank you or whatever.
and
But
she was too. So I
right
mean,
now, Lulu will say yes agreeably and with this beautiful inflection of like, yeah, girl, I know what you're talking about. Yes. Yes. Like she
and
will agree. And then you
yeah.
let her off a bus and she has no idea the school bus driver should have
And
no.
the thing is like she probably could be okay home for a very, very short time. I would never leave her home. We never leave her. She's always supervised. She always has somebody at the house with her because what would happen if she choked? What
Yeah.
would happen if she fell and she was bleeding? What if
Emergency.
It's
Something
seizure.
starts on fire.
what if she was, got a bad cut? She's not going to know to get something and put pressure to the wound. And you know what? Maybe she would know. Maybe she would instinctively know to do that. but she's not going to be able to call 911. That she's not going to be able to do. And she can't speak, so she couldn't tell them anything, even if she could, which she can't do. She doesn't have a concept of what that means. So there's all these things. What if the house is on fire? She knows not to leave the house. So I don't know if she would leave the house. Like, you just don't know. It's like you're taking a chance with her life, and it's not worth ever taking that risk. But people don't look at her and understand that,
People
so
want the easy way through, though. They want to say, like, oh, I asked this girl if she should get off the bus, and she's like, yeah, girl, let her off the bus. Like,
well,
they
I mean, I
want,
have struggles
like,
with her program at school where they really don't have an understanding of where she's at either. Like, where they
but
tell
it
me
wouldn't
things
be
like,
just the school if she was also going to work, if she was also, because it's an
mhm.
easy thing to misunderstand with this, like, beautiful, agreeable, yeah, let's do it.
I mean, but a van driver to someone who runs a program for
Yeah.
special needs individuals you would think that person would have more of an understanding.
Well,
They
you
don't.
think a lot of things.
They
They
tell
don't.
me to,
They
um,
don't.
they want her to wear a cover up over her bathing suit. She's not going to do it, people. It's
You're
not
like,
happening.
does Dora wear a cover up? If not, F off.
And she's not, because you know what she's thinking? She's thinking, I'm not going to
Silly.
put that thing on me and get it wet. Like, she's
Yeah.
just not going to do it. So they asked me to have a conversation with her about it. And I'm like, oh, sure, okay. Like, so it's really hard. It is really important sometimes for the people that are taking care of your child, that are supervising them, to know what their needs are. I mean, it's dangerous if they don't know. And I get what
Hi,
Jamie's saying.
welcome
Like,
to my house.
I'm
You're
not
on
going to
camera.
necessarily say to the cashier at Stop and Shop, hey, my daughter has severe nonverbal autism. I would just say she has autism, if it were to come up or something. But, for the people that are taking care of her, they need to know.
Yeah, that's
Because
what I
that
was
could
saying. Like, in
be
certain situations, you need those labels and you need
Mhm.
those words to
exactly.
explain to people. But you also need like people close to in your life to just get to know your kids so they can be on top of things.
Mhm.
Like, my son's
Mhm.
going on his first field trip tomorrow, and I don't get to go because they tell the special needs parents until last minute. But whatever, I'm not gonna say anything. But my sister, my nephew happens to be in kindergarten as well, and he's in a different class. But my sister is going on the field trip, so she'll be there. And she just knows. Like, I'm like, you text me right
Thanks,
away.
sis,
He
for
goes,
letting me know.
I know that too, but I can have it out with her. But she can text me if, like, all of a sudden she doesn't see Jesse around, or
Jamie
like,
shows up 10 minutes early with coffee for the teacher, and she's like, I'm Christy. What's your sister's name?
And I don't think they've had
Got
a
it.
lot of progress in understanding our kids.
No.
Because they understand autism as a whole. Do you know what I mean? They understand it as a one thing.
Or of
Like we're talking
Jacobs
about.
and Matthews and
Well,
their
and
friend down the street,
Yes.
Ben's.
and I don't think people want to think outside of it. I don't think they want, like, I don't think that van driver wants to, like, think of the fact that if someone says, yeah, I'm okay, you have to really think, like, are you really okay? Like, they
Well,
don't
you
want
can't you can't explain certain things to people, like even your family. Like, we went on a family vacation. My daughter didn't sleep the whole time. Then she didn't sleep for an entire month.
Seriously. And they're like, it's
afterwards.
just an overnight, tabs come.
Like, so you
No.
can't really explain like the fallout of, yes, maybe we'll
Yeah.
make it through this one circumstance, but then I have an entire month of resetting the sleep.
Well, it's like, and they make you feel like you're being dramatic, and then you feel like you're like,
Mhm.
am I being dramatic?
Am
Like,
I
it's
being
like-
crazy?
What's that that hovering mom called?
Helicopter.
helicopter.
Oh, I'm
mom.
like, hey, yeah, you want to believe that I made this happen because I was a overbearing smother.
Smother.
Well, I might get the urge tomorrow to go hang out at a museum. So
Just show up and pay your money to be at the museum.
me and my daughter. But I was just gonna say, like, to give it, like, all our kids are so different, and I think even amongst us, but with other people, there's times where, like, we're like getting a lot of progress, things are really good, and I'm like, man, I'm really lucky. Like, compared to like this going on in someone else's life, I'm like, we're doing really good, blah blah. And then either crap hits the fan, or I see someone else who has a kid also on the spectrum and they're 2 grades ahead and all this stuff, and I'm like, oh, we all have that, like, those highs and lows of like figuring out where our kids out, because we don't even really know all the time.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be comparing to other kids, but those little moments hit you even amongst other kids on the spectrum, not even with just typical kids, where you're like, oh, we're not there, or oh, this could be so much harder.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna
Yes.
lie. I had a little twinge of jealousy over my friend's son's language. I was like, oh man, he's 3 years younger and he's talking like fluidly talking. And I wasn't upset at them, of course, but I was a little jealous. It
Yeah.
was that pang of like,
Yeah.
oh, you know.
I just
Yeah.
had that this last weekend because I was hanging with a friend of mine whose son is 2, who also has a language delay, but he has pointing and he has like, just things that skills that obviously are like neurotypical package skills. You know what I mean? Like
Those
yeah,
lucky duckies.
yeah,
He could figure out how to communicate without, like, that was
yeah.
with Jesse. There was like, people don't understand that. I'm like, not only could he not talk, but, and even before like the normal talking age, he was not communicating. Like, so when you see a little kid, I'm sure pointing and doing these things, you're like, ah,
Yeah, well, and Nora's good at nonverbal communication and she's awesome
oh,
at
that's
it, but it's like the checking, like running but looking back to check to see if you're there, the like
Oh.
listening to like don't climb on the rock, get
Listening.
down. Yeah. Just
Period.
like
whatever that is.
Oh, my
or-
neurotypical kids did not have that skill either, Tabitha, so don't worry.
but it wasn't like necessarily jealous. Like I feel like I'm so much in our world.
I feel like that too. I'm like this.
Yeah.
Huh.
Wow.
Can you drive a
And
car
then when your
too?
friend
is
tries to
different.
make you feel
Huh.
better and says, "Oh, well, my kid does," or my kid doesn't do that, like Kaya could read, she can read. Oh, my kid doesn't read that well. Trying to make me feel better, like they're compensating for the fact my kid has autism.
Yeah.
Or they'll compare, oh, my kid's a picky eater too. And then you just want to throat punch somebody because it's not the same thing, people.
Like
It's
Will
not the same
Smith.
thing.
Well,
So I
and
get
I
both
don't-
sides of it,
Yeah, and I do like get those. It's like a weird thing to like lift the veil sometimes.
Mhm,
Like, and
yes.
I wasn't necessarily jealous of her son. It was just like a different view because all the kids that are around my kids at this moment in time are autistic. And so it's
Mhm.
like,
Yes.
my view of children in general in their age bracket is like on a scale of where they are developmentally at 3 on autistic children.
I'm not kidding. I feel like that deep in my soul. Like, just like, huh.
Yeah, I do.
I get,
No,
Facebook
look at you
memories.
with your cereal bowl, not
Re-
throwing it anywhere.
Or you look at,
Wow.
I'll get these Facebook
Whoa.
memories, and I I remember this. My friend, we were pregnant at the same time. I read her son's first or second birthday, first birthday, and I remember her mom, because Kaya didn't eat, especially not cake, which seemed odd to people because kids can be picky eaters, but most kids would eat cake. And her mom said, "What kid doesn't eat cake?" My kid. And looking back at the pictures, I remember all the kids were playing games. I mean, 1 and 2 and 3-year-olds. There's Kaya. She was just running aimlessly through the place. And it was apparent that she was different. But I remember that vividly. What kid doesn't eat cake?
That stuff used to happen to me, but doesn't really happen to me so much anymore. What happens to me now, and I don't know if jealousy is the right word, but like I get it when I hear stories of other autistic people. Like this one was nonverbal till they were 9. And then they started talking, or just these different things. And it's like, oh, you see these kids that are like in Alyssa's category, but like they're talking, they're having conversations back and forth, and or whatever it might be. It might not even specifically be that. It's just, sometimes it's just like a stab to your heart. And it's not that, I mean, I think my kid's better than them. So let me just make that clear. She's awesome. But it's like for her, like, it's like I want, and a little
Yeah.
bit for me. Of course, I want to have that as a mother with her daughter, but it's like for her, it's like, it just makes her life so hard. So it just seems so unfair. And I know that's just a stupid mindset to get into. And I try to pull myself out of it when I get there.
Oh, I
But
get wicked sad for Celia.
Comparison is a thief. I think they
Of joy.
comparison is
Joy.
a thief of joy.
Thief of joy.
Yep.
It is. It really is.
It
You get
is,
them
yeah.
side by
It really is.
side, and
But
Yeah.
it's not
shattering.
comparing to somebody else when you're thinking like, oh my God, Celia Flanagan has this huge thing to deal with. You're like, Alyssa is hurt on her legs because she's thrown herself down. And you're thinking like, gosh, I'm just so sad that my kid has to
Yeah.
Endure.
get through this moment
Yeah.
by doing this to herself and struggling. Like that sucks. Heartbreak.
You have this huge spectrum of autism, that goes so far and wide. And it's like when you see other people being able to do all these other things, and then it just feels like she's stuck in that one spot, which it's not that's not really what reality is, because she's made so much progress, she's made leaps and bounds, like, I'm so grateful for that, but you just think, like, "Why couldn't she have that type of autism instead?" Like, I
Well,
don't know, like,
I get
I'm
that.
just being
Yeah.
honest.
Well, I was gonna say I get that sometimes with like I love my children. I would not change them, but like not having the opportunity to have neurotypical experiences because I have two autistic children, you know, and that's not anything against my kids or
Of
anything
course
like
not.
that, but like I definitely have felt that over time sometimes where I'm just like, want to throw the birthday party that doesn't have the accommodations or you know what I mean? Like just
Yeah.
have something be simple.
And I find it just comes out of nowhere sometimes, like,
Yes.
and I don't have what you guys are talking about as much, and obviously it's because of her age. So I've gone through all that and kind of I'm not at that point. I mean, I have my youngest daughter now graduating high school, and I'm not like, "Oh, Alyssa didn't get to graduate. Alyssa's not
Survivor.
gonna she
She's a
should be going
survivor, ladies.
she's doesn't isn't gonna get to drive." Like, I don't really get hung up I'm not saying never ever it crosses my mind, but I really don't get hung up on those types of things that often. But sometimes it's like I just wish things didn't have to be so hard. Like, everything is so hard for her,
Yeah.
you know?
That's what gets me is the simplicity other people have.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have
Sometimes it's
no
like
idea.
like just the whether it be even going to a staycation, and I shouldn't be complaining. My kid is just grown
You're
leaps and
not
bounds, but
complaining.
like I can't just we don't just pack a bag. I still have to pack her food. I have to make sure we are at a place where there's a restaurant at least that she'll eat out of because she won't, fries have to be a certain cut and color. I mean, still, so it's like,
Mhm.
oh, my friend, we quite often go with my friend Terry Lynn, and she has twins. The boys are 6 and her daughter London is 10. And it's like they just pack a bag and come, and they stay in the morning and they swim all morning and they have the big continental breakfast that's included. We get up and leave the hotel at 7. I mean, because she's done, we go home in the morning kind of thing, So it's like, I'm just like, oh, the simplicity of just a staycation in
Just
heaven.
going. Do you guys
Mhm.
ever see in your kids that they want, like, do you ever see when your kid wants to almost be typical? I don't know how to
Yeah.
describe it. Like, Jesse does this thing. So every day I pick him up. The special ed kids get out like 5 minutes earlier, but then we go pick up my nephew who's in kindergarten also. And Jesse's actual kindergarten class, who he is with for a little bit of the day, comes out and they all line up, and then I'm gonna cry. Their parents pick them up. And every once in a while he does this thing. He always goes and hugs his teacher, which is really sweet. But he'll go stand amongst the kids and he'll like point to me and he'll run to me
Mm.
like
Always like
Oh,
action
he's a
I'm gonna
regular
cry.
kid,
man.
I'm gonna
like he's
cry
with the rest
too.
of the class
Oh my
doing
god.
that. And it breaks my heart because like I want him to be able to do stuff. Like he's going on this field trip tomorrow. I want him to be able to go without a para. I want him to just be able to like have fun. But it's not safe for him. And like he needs to be in the special ed room and he needs to be released 5 minutes early. But it just breaks my heart because like he wants so bad to be
Yeah.
like those other kids. And it just like those moments are like when it really hurts when it's like, I mean, also the self-injury and all those other things, but those little struggles where you're like, oh, I wish you could have that too.
Oh,
Hug
friend.
a friend.
Oh,
Uh,
I'll see that sometimes, for on her old school playground. And, kids, I think around 10 and 11 really notice things like that. And she'll go up and stand, hi, kids, hi, girls, what's your name? And a lot of times they just don't want to bother with her. And my heart shatters because she just so desperately wants to play with those kids. And like you, Jamie, I mean, I'm fighting back tears.
Yeah.
That's hard.
He'll refer to them as the children. Like it's obvious that he doesn't get fully what's going on, but he gets
Yeah.
partially, like he sees them as like a separate group. He's like, oh, look at the children. Like, so part of it's really adorable and sweet, but part of it, like, I mean, I didn't expect to cry, but part of it's kind of like, oh, I wish you could have that buddy.
Yeah.
I
It is,
think
it's hard.
that is a really difficult, like those are always the saltiest moments for
Mhm.
this mom. Like Celie has been trying to articulate her difference, and like she told me recently, we had this we're back into like aggression where we're in the struggle. And I say back like we left, but anyways, we're in this thing. She tried to let her bad brains out by pushing a screw, which she calls a nail, into her temple to let it out. And it's like, I'm like, okay, she's gonna hurt herself fact, like this is an immediate danger thing. But B, she's trying to identify these parts of herself that she wants to disconnect from, that she wishes could go, that she wishes she could change, that she thinks is different or bad, or like it's just the
Like
reckoning.
the awareness is a blessing and a curse,
Mm-hmm.
Good Lord have
you know,
mercy. It's hard.
It really is.
because you don't want to say that you don't want it. Obviously, you want it, but at the same time, there's something about them being blissfully unaware and not having that type of heartache that, like,
I sort
know.
of feel like it's that thing where when you have, I've always watched people age older, like where I've seen a lot of dementia in my life. I've lived through a lot of my loved ones having a stroke or something where like you have this ability, and then you don't have this part. You don't have function of your body, or your mind is quite right, or your mind isn't in your body. Like there's all this juxtaposition of the thing. And I really feel strongly that if it's a struggle at 7, that she's trying to articulate this thing, like where we better put our seatbelts on. And that's where the sad lives. Because 2 years ago at this time, she just believed that everything Celie Flanagan was like the light of the universe. And I used to think like, let her ego build, let her ego build. She'll get to middle school and it'll collapse. And then we'll ride out what's left, like the Celie sparkle that remains. But I mean, I don't know, it's hard. That's
Well,
not depicted in the goddamn
literally
movies.
my greatest fear in life is that my son's spirit is going to be broken by knowing that he is different than others. My daughter, not so much worried about her in that sense. I mean, she'll take this world by storm, I have a feeling. My son, his tender heart, I swear, I think about this regularly on a regular basis, and it literally breaks my heart because I don't want him to know or feel that he's that different, that it makes him feel bad about himself as a person, you know. So.
Yeah, it is. There's just so many different things that just kind of get you in the, from all these different things. So I guess
Basically, it's not a linear spectrum, people. It's a big circle of skills and struggles. Don't think of it as a line, because that's not what it is.
and if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism.
That's it.
Amen.
There's lots of differences in our children. There's lots of differences in everybody. So it's no different for people on the spectrum. They have all their differences mixed in with their autism and other diagnoses they might have. So, but they're still underneath it, all different people with different personalities, different interests, different wants, different needs. There's so many differences. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to that. And we just like to kind of throw it out there so people can just be a little more aware and a little more sensitive. Yeah.
Coming next, storytellers, people.
It's
Yours
us.
truly.
Us.
Yeah.
From the table. Stories from the table. Well, thank you guys for listening. We appreciate the support. Have a great night.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us at the table for the 3rd episode of our 10th series, all about autism. If you are enjoying the podcast, please make sure you are subscribed and rate and review us. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can also email us at tablefor5podcast@gmail.com if you'd like to contact us. We have new episodes every Monday. Join us next week for our Storytellers episode. We'll see you there. Bye.